All right, I'm going to begin. Like I was telling our speakers, I wish we didn't have sort of all the seats up here, so we could come up here and do kind of a theater thing and get everybody very excited. But, anyways, I think this makes it a little bit more intimate. Anyways, good morning. It's my pleasure to moderate this particular session. And I promise you, this is going to be lively, it's going to be provocative, it's going to be the one session that you remember. So my name is Ron Iguchi. I'm the CEO of ImageCat, a risk management company based in the US. And the title of our session is Symphony of Tradition and Innovation, Orchestrating Global Resilience in Diverse Communities. So I'll explain a little bit more sort of the context and the background. I don't think any of us really would argue that our society today is more complex, but it's more interesting. And I think one of the reasons why is because technology seems to be very invasive in the sense that it affects virtually everything that we do. And you might find some people saying, well, is technology outpacing our ability to really understand and use technologies, particularly from the standpoint of disaster management. But arguably, there are a lot of demonstrated examples of where technology has been very, very impactful in a very positive way. Another area that is changing very rapidly, in my opinion, is natural disasters. Our disasters are more frequent, they're more severe, and things that used to be sort of our mega disasters, which occurred on a decadal basis, seem to be occurring almost every year, maybe more frequently. And if you begin to factor in climate change, where we begin to look forward, I think you're going to see that maybe that cycle becomes even shorter. And so this is something that's, that's very, very concerning to a lot of people. The session, this particular session discusses the intersection of technology and traditional ways of looking at risk mitigation for natural hazards. And I think there are a lot of important points and discussion items that we need to cover to really understand whether, this is a good thing. Are we sort of smart enough to take advantage of all the technologies for disaster response, disaster management, disaster recovery. What you're going to hear today are four experts that will talk about various perspectives of technology and how it's impacted disaster management. And they come from all different areas, so I think that you'll see a very broad perspective of things that are very important. So, before I bring, I was hoping there'd be a lot more people here, but before I bring Helen up, I wanted to see, for example, maybe just by audience participation, if you think that smart technologies that we truly understand and that we're able to effectively use and leverage this in disaster, say, management, thinking about AI, machine learning, and so forth, stand up and think if you believe that technologies, and you guys can stay down, but technology is really a major solution as we move forward in trying to mitigate disasters. So stand up or not stand up. Oh, okay. Well, heck, I think we can all go home now. Anyways, what I hope we can do is go through our different speakers. The format for this is that each speaker will have 5 minutes, guys, to make an effective presentation. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to have some pointed questions. We're all going to sit up here, and we're going to go through things that I think I'm going to try and use to tease out really some of the salient points, regarding technology and sort of traditional ways of doing these things. And then, time permitting, we'll open it up for questions from the audience. So I'm going to start with Helen. And Helen, you want to come on up?
Thank you, Ron. So good morning, everyone. So I have 5 minutes, and I know we have a very tough convener here. So 5 minutes to give you a very brief overview of the past, present, and future of seismic risk modeling, at least in my opinion. So I'm going to go through sort of the last century and the impact of earthquakes of the last century with a focus on Japan. So what we've seen is, in the first quarter of the 20th century, big advances in how we design buildings to withstand earthquakes. And lateral force method, so the method where we have to design buildings to consider the fact that they should resist a lateral force from earthquakes, was actually independently proposed in Italy after the Messina earthquake in 1908, but also in Japan. And we saw after the 1923 earthquake, the Great Kanto earthquake, that this was then actually an update to the code, and this method was introduced in the 1924 design code. If we move forward to the next 50 years, there were a number of damaging earthquakes in Japan. These highlighted a number of issues that needed to be considered, both in design and assessment, such as liquefaction after the Niigata earthquake in 1964. And they also demonstrated improvements that were needed to the design code for different building types. And so in 1981, a new design code was introduced where there were explicit checks, not just on the strength of buildings, but also needing to consider the ductility, so the deformability of buildings. Then after the 1981 code was introduced, we see the 1995 Kobe earthquake, which brought some more lessons, which really demonstrated that what had been thought to be modern engineered buildings were not performing as expected. There was also a lot of loss to infrastructure. And so this then led to another generational update to the design codes, and in 2000 there was the performance-based seismic design was introduced here in Japan. And so on these slides I've showed you also a number of other things that were happening over time, but I don't have time to go into them. But the sort of the key point that I want to make from this very brief history is that damaging earthquakes have really been those pivotal moments, those drivers of teaching us about the impact of earthquakes and changing the way that we assess hazards, the way we design buildings, and the way that we assess seismic risk. When it comes to seismic risk, over the past around 50 years, we've really got a very good handle now of models for seismic hazard assessment, exposure modeling, vulnerability modeling, and also thanks to GEM, the Global Earthquake Model, we now have transparent tools, the OpenQuake engine, which is an open source software. We have a number of open models, which allows us to assess the seismic risk at the global scale. The users of these models can really understand the background because the models are transparent, because the software is open. You can really now understand how the seismic risk assessment has been undertaken. But if we look at 2 years where GEM released those global seismic risk maps, so the first one was in 2018 and an update was in 2023, the world changed dramatically. There was almost 400 million more people on the planet, around 75 additional buildings needed million buildings needed to accommodate them. And so the world is changing dramatically and very fast. And so I think what we're going to see in the next earthquakes is that we're going to find out that our models have come out of date. These static models that we develop and update only every few years, they're very quickly out of date because population is increasing, cities are becoming more urban, the rural populations are moving to the cities. So whilst we do have open models and software and we have a good handle of seismic risk, we will probably find soon that we need a faster way to update those models. So what is the solution? Potentially technology and AI and machine learning. We've been working on this at GEM, and I'm just very quickly going to give a couple of examples. Perhaps we can go into more details in the Q&A. So when it comes to exposure modeling, we're using machine learning to try and use data, global data on OpenStreetMap, Google Street View images of buildings, to train algorithms to very quickly assess buildings, assess the attributes for seismic risk, and to scale this up to the global scale. Also, when it comes to large-scale vulnerability modeling, we can also use machine learning. We can train algorithms using very simple damage proxy maps that come from satellite imagery, but we bring in information about the buildings that we know, the performance of buildings that we've learned from past earthquakes. So I think I'm running out of time, but just want to leave you with a final thought, which is that we see at GEM that machine learning and AI can definitely help us to quite rapidly develop our models, keep them up to date, and to also scale them to the large scale, to the global scale. But I wonder, with some of these algorithms, do we really understand them? And could that take us back to the era of black boxes? So I mentioned that we're now very transparent with our risk assessment, but could we soon be making decisions on models that we don't actually understand as humans? So, thank you.
He's a professor at Tohoku University, but he's also a proud co-founder and CTO of a Japanese company, RTI Cast. This Tohoku University-based startup is the first to be officially licensed as a private sector tsunami warning provider. Okay, the fun fact, he likes running. His best record for a full marathon is 3 hours and 28 minutes. You know, I ran one, it was like 6 hours, so that's pretty darn good. Anyways, the bottom line is he still wants to break that record, okay. So yeah. Anyway.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm Shinichi Koshimura. So this morning what I wanted to share with you is the recent advances of the technology, which is underway in our team, that's called Tsunami Digital Twin. So thinking about the digital twin, I think we are utilizing the digital twin technologies in many fields, including the urban planning or architecture, even our sciences, aerospace engineering, and then even for our human body. So every day, every time, the data are measured and taken into the cloud system, even from our body, measuring our heart rate, and then tell you what's going to tell you. The running models and then the statistical models, simulations, you can tell that suggestions or recommendations to what we do for the next. We need more steps, or we need more sleep, something like that. So the thing is, the digital twin technology is that now very useful, and then what we are trying to do is to expand that to the tsunami disaster resilience. So this is what we call the framework hexagon model of the tsunami digital twin. So take a look at the left-hand side, that's a physical world, and the right-hand side is cyber world. And then we're confirming that the hexagon models that consist of the very critical technologies, starting from the sensing and the monitoring, inference, and the policy design, even the practice is our member of technological member of the digital twin. So what we do through the Earth observation and the social sensing, that it comes to the cyber world to get the hazard forecast and then potential hazard scenarios to get the consequences of the disaster processes with the exposure information. And then using that, we're going to have the design policy or adaptation strategies. And then that is going to be fed back to the real world as a part of practice. So this feedback groups, I think, is very important for the tsunami digital twin. It's a fusion of computing power and then the sensing, monitoring, and visualization, and AI. So that's what we are trying to achieve in our project of the tsunami digital twin. And then the good thing is that, as Ron mentioned, that we have the real-time computational power, which is fully operational as a GNS-based tsunami inundation forecast system. That's the reason why we established a university-based startup, RTCast, to use the full power of the Tohoku University supercomputer to get the forecast information in a couple of minutes like that. So that is what we have now, making social services called Tsunami Cast. That is now utilized in the government, central government, and then also prefectural government for their part of the disaster response activities. So that's what we have in terms of the hazard forecast. And in the future, what we want to do is to get the consequences of the hazard attacking to the society. So what if we have the real-time data acquisition from individual data like that? And then what if we add the one more layer, we call that tsunami layer, like that, and then to seek where the people will be suffered, and then what we should do for the search and rescue mission to find the people and save it. And also, even before the tsunami comes, we can try to disseminate that information to let the people know where to go to save their lives. So that is, we call that the personalized alert. And that's one of the good outcomes from our tsunami digital twin. That is what we are trying to achieve in next 5 years. We hope that this kind of information can be utilized and then received in the society. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Lori's up next. All right, so Lori prepared a short bio, so I'm going to add to it. So Lori is a urban planning consultant and researcher specializing in disaster recovery and catastrophe risk management. And she was recently awarded a big award by the Earthquake Engineering Research Institute that acknowledges, the contributions that she's made in the seismic policy area. So her fun fact was, and I think you had a typo, because it says she also lives.
Loves.
Okay, loves. Okay, she also loves kiteboarding and sailing on San Francisco Bay. So, Lori.
Thanks, Ron. Nice to be here. So I'm going to talk a little bit about recovery, post-disaster recovery, but planning for recovery, both pre and post-disaster, and how things have changed over time. So there are many examples of cities going back into the 1600s that have been damaged by fires, other big events, and there are examples within those where there were visionaries at the time who thought about building back better. And these are just two, Lisbon and Tokyo. But what they were what they reacted to was the event they just had. And they didn't have models to actually help them forecast, was that the biggest event we'll ever see, or what other kinds of hazards might we face? But still, the idea of rebuilding more resiliently is in our ethos as urban planners. One of the first works that really was landmark in looking across a whole number of disaster cases and bringing some structure to how we think about the process of recovery was done in the late 1970s, looking across a whole bunch of disasters in the world. And what Haas, Cates, and Bowden did was really say that there's a way in which we think about the activity and how society sort of deals with the built environment post-disaster. There's a period in which there's the emergency. We typically call that the response period. But really what we're doing is not necessarily doing any rebuilding activity. Then there's a period in which we start to restore function. And then we start to actually replace, like for like, the easy stuff to do. And then we're left with the really hard stuff to do. So they call that reconstruction phase 1 and 2. And we know these things don't happen sequentially in an ordered way like they're showing. But it did bring a lot of structure, at least at that point in time, to thinking about recovery as a process, and also instigating people to start thinking more about planning for the management of that process, not just thinking about the physical aspects of recovery. And so one of the first really interesting studies where technology was used to think both about the physical aspects and the operational aspects was done in Los Angeles. And it happened it started after the 1971 earthquake. And it was at the point where loss estimation technology was concepts were just emerging, that you could use loss estimation on a portfolio or community scale and not just on an individual building asset scale like nuclear power plants. And so the Pepper study actually developed 4 earthquake scenarios for Los Angeles, and then looked at where the city's planning areas and their future land use plans, and talked about where those things actually had conflicts and where there were opportunities in thinking about planning for a future earthquake. What that led to was actually the city of Los Angeles actually constructed an operational plan and worked on that, and this plan was drafted before the 1994 Northridge earthquake. And it actually was very specific about what the city would do, how it would reorganize its governance after a major disaster, but also what the different city departments would do. And it was actually a study I did, looked at how that plan was implemented and used after the Northridge earthquake, and really found that the process of planning for this was very informative at that department level. They didn't execute, the Northridge earthquake wasn't so large that they had to execute the restructuring of government, but they did at a department level do some really innovative stuff that was a result of how they had been thinking about this in the pre-event, non-stress environment. And so not that LA directly informed this, but around the same time, the idea of pre-planning for the operational processes of disaster recovery really took hold. And you have a number of different frameworks and guides in different countries. And then the World Bank and UN have done at least 3 iterations of their disaster recovery framework guide. And this has really been an activity that's been going on, sort of institutionalizing, just like response planning, starting to institutionalize pre-planning for the process of disaster recovery. This graphic got a little messed up, but I just want to show you that really pre-planning is very organizational focused. It's about processes and roles. It's generally multi-hazard or agnostic to hazard, whereas post-planning still remains very physically processed, very informed more and more now by the advances of technology and modeling in understanding data and also looking at future risk. And just as an example of that, one is what Koshimura was involved with in the Tohoku recovery, where they used his models to actually inform the recovery plans, the design of the levees, and what other sort of mitigation measures they would input into the different city recovery plans. But in Christchurch, technology and data and analyses were used in real time in that compressed time environment to inform the standards for rebuilding in the central business district, for the infrastructure design, a 5-system coordinated design and repair of the heavily damaged infrastructure in Christchurch, and then also the categorization of the standards for foundation repairs and even buyouts of the most heavily damaged residential areas in Christchurch. So technology and data really are kind of coming together, but we still aren't really using loss estimation in the way that we could, like the Pepper study, really bringing future scenarios into pre-planning for recovery. So in conclusion, basically, frameworks are becoming institutionalized. They're improving how organizations are preparing for and managing recovery, but we lack standards, we lack triggers or mandates. Nobody's mandated to do a recovery framework as I know it in the world. Evaluation criteria, we need to consider unique post-disaster conditions and how they affect all of those different operational plans. Loss estimation, as I mentioned, is helping provide these plausible futures for planning, definitely being used in response, less so in recovery and rebuilding planning. And lastly, engineering evaluations and benefit cost studies and other types of work are informing land use, building, and infrastructure standards, both pre and post-disaster in planning. But we need more open data sources, and it needs to be more timely, especially post-disaster. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. All righty, our last speaker is Shubhra Ghosh. I know very little about this guy. Shubhra is Vice President of Data Services for ImageCat. And he's been with the company from almost the inception. So we're going to be celebrating our 25th anniversary next year. So anyways, the fun fact is that he's originally from India. He speaks 3 languages and can understand at least 2 more. What are the other 2?
I mean, I can understand a little bit of Punjabi and Gujarati. So all the languages, the main one is English, which is not my native language, but all the others are Indian languages.
So no Japanese, huh? Okay.
Skoshi.
Skoshi, huh?
Yeah.
Okay. He grew up playing cricket and football and continues playing football to this day. And I can tell you, he comes in after the weekend, you know, he's limping in. He says, oh, yeah, it was a tough game. Anyways, Shubhra.
Thanks, Ron, and good morning, everybody. So I'm going to change gears a little bit here, switch to a different hazard. But I think the elements and components of what we've been hearing applies to wildfire as well. And the focus of my talk is community scale modeling and planning for wildfire risk. You know, wildfire has been in the spotlight in the last decade or more we see these, you know, larger and more impactful fires affecting, you know, different parts of the world. I'm from California, and in the last 5 or 6 years, we have seen some very, very large fires. And the one that I wanted to just talk a little bit about, very, very briefly, is the Santa Barbara, the Central Valley area of California fire, which caused, you know, tremendous amount of damage. You know, insured losses were almost like $2 billion the last time I heard. But it wasn't just building and infrastructure that was damaged, but it had a great impact on lives and livelihoods, particularly people living and working in that area. Farm workers had a tremendous effect where they lost livelihood for a short period of time, and transportation network was cut off, and there were a lot of health effects. So overall, in order for us to understand the impacts of large fires like this, it's crucial we dig deep into the various components that bring models together. So those are exposure, vulnerability, and the risk. So here are some other examples that I showed: the Lahaina fire recently in Hawaii, the Paradise Fire, and then there's a lot of fires burning in Canada. So with that context, when we look at the impacts of wildfire, it's very complex, it's very varied. And unlike some of the disasters, it's very interconnected. So it affects multiple sectors. It's not just the direct damage, but the damage on different sectors like the health sector, the infrastructure sector, and smoke-related impacts are pretty huge. So it's very critical that we use the models and data that are there for understanding this risk to really create more resilient communities, which I'm going to talk about a little bit. But this is a very complicated problem, and it's affecting different parts of the world. When it comes to models and tools for wildfire, there are two big blocks of models that are available. The ones that are more macro, that are being used mostly by wildfire management agencies like U.S. Forest Services. They use these humongous data sets, they run these models, but those are really appropriate for managing wildland. It's, the human aspect is kind of missing there. But those models are applicable, but they are very, very large macro models. And then you have these very, very micro-scale models which look at the building level, and you model every element of the building, what it's built of, the type of roof, how the fire is going to burn based on the building rating. So those are very micro, almost physics-based engineering models. So there's a huge gap between the macro models and the micro models that are really required when you're looking at the community, because the communities are kind of fall in between. So there's kind of a move from the planning perspective towards more of the community scale model, because the decisions are being made at the community level, but you have these models which does not have a sense of scale, whether it's either it's at the bottom or it's at the top. So looking at this problem from this notion of scale and how the risk kind of translates between different scales, it's very important. And so there's a lot of work that's been done looking at mitigation plans and stakeholders who are at these different levels of scale when it comes to wildfire. That's why I keep on saying this is a very complicated problem, because there are actors who are getting impacted, but they don't have control on how to kind of design policies, because perhaps the policies are being designed at a higher level than it should be. There's a lot of technologies out there. I just share Earth observation technology, which is kind of what we love at ImageCat. So there are sensors that are constantly monitoring the Earth. There's a whole host of sensors that I list here that are either used for fire detection, fire spread modeling. It's great at estimating fuel load, canopy height, that sort of thing. And there are maps like that you see, which is the Fire Information Resource Management System. It's put out by NASA, and it maps several sensing satellites. And to the right, it's an index that is being credited to European Space Agency. But the Canadians have done a great job in kind of creating a fire weather type of index. However, these type of indices and sensing data is not really ready or fit for purpose when it comes to community level planning. So how do you take all this and create models and information systems that can be used for decision making at the community level? So I'm going to leave everybody with this. Kind of the question that Ron asked us before to think about is, with all these technologies and data and model that's available, are we at a point where the communities can effectively use these to make decisions? To that, the short answer is not yet, because there are two key challenges for adopting such technology. One is that the ease of access. I mean, these type of data sets are large, needs to be processed. So when you're talking about a city or a community, they don't have the tools or the know-how to actually use these for decision making. And then the other one is kind of related. and how do you operationalize these sorts of information into policies and land use policies or building codes. So I'll leave the presentation here, but there has been a lot of thought and work. This report on the wildland fire mitigation from Congress that came out, it identifies these sorts of themes that needs to be addressed to create a model or a suite of models that can be used for community decision making. Thank you. The overview one?
My slide.
Yeah.
I only got one slide. And our panelists, please take a seat.
There you go.
Okay, is that, okay. All right, thanks, Schubert. In fact, I heard that, I wasn't here yesterday, but Schubert gave a great Ignite talk, so anyways, kudos to him. So some of you may know these folks up here, some may not, but they are very prolific speakers. And to get them to fit their talks into 5 minutes is amazing. Anyways, I think they had to be congratulated for that. Okay, so I discussed the format for this. I want to pose a question to each of the speakers, the panelists, and then I'm going to open it up to you all to ask questions. And if we run out of questions there, I've got plenty of questions that I have on my list here. So I'm going to start with Helen. And I think Helen gave a great explanation and justification for machine learning, AI, how it's helping to essentially address future seismic risks and things like that. So I'm not going to ask her a question on that. What I'm going to ask her is earthquake early warning. This is something that I think is, very popular, certainly in California. And certainly in Japan and Mexico, and I think the idea, the notion, being able to forecast, before the event actually hits an area is very, very important, because it allows you not only to issue warnings, regarding, potentially, say, injuries, fatalities, things like that, but also I think from the standpoint of trying to minimize damage. And that's one of the things that I think is kind of new. And the question that I would have for you, Helen, is how accurate are these methods? And what are some of the challenges in trying to improve this sort of early alerting so that people, so that stakeholders would begin to really feel comfortable using it? So what are some of the challenges?
Thanks, Ron. So maybe I'm not the best person to talk about earthquake early warning. It's not my expertise, but I can say a few words about it in my opinion. So maybe just a few words about what we're talking about when we talk about earthquake early warning. So it's this idea that we're using the initial signal, the so-called P wave that's arriving at a station very close to the epicenter of the earthquake, and we're using that information, that initial signal, to try and then forecast what the magnitude and what of that event's going to be, what the shaking is going to be at larger distances, and sending alert to those populations that are further away from the epicenter. And so I think what some of the challenges are with this technology is that often that initial levels of shaking that's received at the sensors is not enough to really know, is this a small event or a big event? And time is needed, really, more time is needed to understand, is this going to be a big event? And then we're losing that time that we need to actually give the alert to the population and give them time to prepare. There's also, often it's not considered that the population needs time to react. So the warning times are actually typically very, very short, and the population also needs time to do something and react to that warning. Other things that are often not considered are the so-called blind zones. So if the earthquake is shallow, if it's onshore, there is an area where there is no possibility of giving a warning. And that will typically be the area where there is damage, where there is the largest impact. And so we can potentially only really use this technology for certain events, the offshore, deeper events. What we're doing in GEM is to use some of our hazard models. In fact, in the Philippines, we've co-developed a hazard model with them, and they're using it now to sort of develop an early earthquake an earthquake early warning network. So you can really optimize the network so you can get the best benefit from these alerts. We're also looking globally. We're working with seismologists at ETH to look at, again, globally, which areas of the world can really benefit from earthquake early warning. And there we're really also trying to estimate the impacts of those warnings and people reacting and what could be the reduction in fatalities. But this also brings a lot of questions with it. What really is the reduction of risk when people are given that alert? So yeah, we're trying to work on it, but AI is also an area where there's a lot of, could bring a lot of benefits, especially as I mentioned this idea that we need more time to estimate the bigger magnitudes. I think there's definitely a scope for improvements there, but I think we need to communicate also what we can and can't get from earthquake early warning, and it should be considered just as one mechanism in a whole continuum of sort of risk management procedures and solutions.
And I got a follow-up question for you as well. So I've always heard, and I understand that, you know, the size of the event, the rupture length, and so forth, really is key in determining, you know, essentially what the extent of the event could be. Is there a technology, is there research going on to try and sort of get a better handle on that? Because I really think that's kind of key.
I'm not so in depth on that part of the, let's say, the risk process. I don't know, but I'm sure there is. I'm sure there is a lot. There's a lot of data now. A lot of data, a lot of modeling. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Okay. All right, Koshi, I've got two questions for you. I think the first one is maybe more of a personal one. When the Tohoku earthquake occurred, I think you were not in Sendai. I think you were someplace else. So, what was your first impression when that event occurred, and how did that affect maybe your priorities in terms of what you thought research, you know, was really needed?
Thanks for asking, Ron. I was actually 13 years ago. I was in Tokyo Station, just on Shinkansen. That's like you did last night, or going back to Sendai, my hometown. And then I got the shaking alert, and then I thought the first response to me was like, oh, that's a Nankai Trough earthquake. But I was wrong. That was happened in Tohoku region, and the shaking, even in Tokyo Station, that's so strong. And then I thought that there's no train service will be stopped. And then I decided to go outside of Tokyo Station to get the last rental car in front of the Tokyo Station. And then driving back, spending 18 hours to get to Sendai. And then next day, everything changed. And then I was involved in surveys. But the thing is that what I thought on the way back to Sendai Station, driving along, what I can get in terms of the disaster information, that is only from the radio, the tsunami warning messages, that the tsunami attacking to the coast, and then some of the places were heavily damaged, something like that. It's very scattered and then very unreliable or uncertain. So I was very worried, my friends and my families in Sendai, and then but I had no idea to know what's happening in Sendai or Tohoku region. So that is, I think that's a kind of motivation for me to prioritize my work. That working on this thing is I wanted to have the whole picture of the disaster in the aftermath. I wanted to know what's happening, and then I wanted to know what should we do. So that is a kind of motivation, that is my story of how we prioritize work.
And that's the motivation for the notion of the digital twin.
Sort of, yeah.
One of the things I think requires a very heavy computer science sort of component, and you're an earthquake engineer. So how did you begin to sort of piece together that that sort of mix and intersection in a way that you could actually present something that would be an actual platform or model? How did you do that?
Yeah, we started talking with the seismology, earth sciences, and then computer scientists, and then to fused each of the expertise to make the digital twin. And then I think we have the pretty successful so far. And then, but the thing is that we have the good story to achieve that early tsunami inundation forecast system. But next step is that we want to expand that technology to the planning phase. Like Lori, I appreciate that Lori mentioned that we use the tsunami models in phase of reconstruction. Actually, in Sendai City, we worked the people in the Sendai City to design the elevated road on the coastal region as a second protection line in their recovery plan. And we had a kind of what-if analysis, and in the sort of digital twin, what we say now. What if we have the 3-meter elevated road? Or what if we have the 6-meter elevated road? And then what we do is to run the model with many potential scenarios and then many conditions that will be happening in the future, in the computer, in the cyber world. The good thing is that we can do some experiments, many experiments, to get the optimal solutions, optimal configurations of the road, and also the height to be elevated. And then as a consequence, we decided that to elevate 6 meters from the road, from the ground. So that is one of the advantages using the digital twin in the planning process. So in that sense, what we want to do for the next step is to work with the more planners, decision makers, policy designers, and then also the practitioners to expand the capabilities of digital twins.
Okay, great. Okay, this one's for Lori. So, Lori, the Pepper study, I've always been a strong believer and advocate for that study when it first came out and when you and Spango, was Mater. Well, when you guys were
Yeah,
working
they worked
on
it, but it was before me.
Okay. But the notion of trying to develop a better plan for recovery, when you have such large disasters, I think it just makes a whole lot of sense. And so you talked about some of the things that kind of need to occur to make it happen. I'm just wondering why, it's not being done more now. What are some of the challenges, in trying to make that more sort of institutionalized? Because I think the notion and the concept is so important. And, I think that there are some things that are available, for people to use to implement that kind of concept. But why is it so tough?
Well, if you're interested in this topic, come to the special session on Thursday.
We worked that out.
That the UN IRP is hosting on risk-informed recovery, because we're going to be trying to dig into that. So recovery is really interesting. I mean, emergency management agencies in different countries have the responsibility of recovery. But if you think about it, it's kind of countercultural to the culture of disaster management agencies, because they're judged on being ready for the next emergency. And recovery is a long-term process that involves financing and urban planning and infrastructure people. And so while they have responsibility for planning for it, I think they're often not the appropriate agency to management, or they need different people. Because the people who are the emergency managers need to get back and get ready for the emergency planning. So one is just institutionalizing the process of recovery planning still has some challenges. And then it's really, how do you bring all those different kinds of expertise to the process? If you're going to use, you need the access to the tools, you need the knowledge of using tools like loss estimation for recovery planning. And there's also something that I think is important in that if it is physical planning based, then you're also dealing with, for urban planners, an intimidating issue, which is the potential of a land use taking, in that you're forecasting losses in a certain area, or you're putting policies together where you're saying, we want to buy out this area, we know damages are going to be high, and so planners tend to shy away from that challenge pre-disaster. So there's still a number of sort of foundational issues that need to be worked through, but I think that if we had mandates or triggers or incentives, something that was more policy triggering for recovery planning, we'd probably be able to work through some of these a little bit better.
Alrighty, and the question for Schubert, I think, is one of the tougher ones. So wildfires, wildfire insurance. So in California, it's getting tougher and tougher for homeowners to actually be able to purchase wildfire insurance. In fact, a lot of the insurance companies have basically left the state, and so the availability of insurance is very, very scarce. So the question is, what needs to happen to make insurance for wildfires more available and more affordable in areas of high wildfire risk?
Yeah, like you said, it's a tough one, but I'll share some of my knowledge here, being in California, being tied to the industry. And in fact, homeowner dropped my insurance. I'm about a mile from the beach, and there's no scope of wildfire happening, for miles, but still, insurers are using some interesting metrics, not right policy. And it has to do with the very, very large losses that have happened. Some of the very large losses that have happened in the last few years. And the regulatory agency, and Laurie is more familiar with the regulation side of things for wildfire as well, it's to look at a longer time history of losses, to price your insurance. And the insurers, based on the recent losses, decided that, it doesn't make business sense. So they have been pulling out. So what needs to happen, obviously there is the side from, pricing. If it's priced right, the insurers will stay or write more business. But from the homeowners and the people who are insured, there's also there's certain measures that are recommended, like hardening your homes, thinning brushes around your house, and some of which is feasible for the homeowners to take on. But a lot of it comes at at a higher scale or level, which is homeowners may not be able to do it. So that needs there needs to be programs for home hardening that are funded through some public-private type of partnerships that will make insurance more affordable. So there is no easy answer at this point, but I know the state has stepped in and looking at catastrophe models, mandating it, or there's a law coming that says you need to do catastrophe modeling that you do for earthquake in California to price your insurance, and you just kind of look at like a history of loss, recent history, and say, okay, I'm not going to write anymore. So there are these sorts of tools and technologies and models have to be in place. There are also different actors in different stakeholders who are part of the equation, who need to be aware of the problem and take proactive steps. But also things like building code changes and land use changes. Some of the things that Laurie was talking about, those are long-term changes that need to happen for insurance to be more affordable. But there is a path forward, using tools and technologies. But the key element that is most challenging are the homeowners and the people part of the equation. So that
Okay.
can be addressed through policy changes.
Okay. I was passed a note here saying that I guess I'm too prolific here. So I'm going to close it here, unfortunately, because I think you all need time to get to the next session. But I'd like to summarize by saying that, I think what you saw or heard today are some interesting perspectives that really, demonstrate that things are not straightforward, that there's still open issues, and maybe, areas where technology might be able to help. So hopefully you've been able to learn something, from the presentations and the discussion. And so I'm going to ask you again that simple question. But I'm not going to ask you to stand. I'm going to have you raise your hand if you have changed your mind, because everybody said yes, technology was the solution here. Is there anybody that now feels that, maybe we have a ways to go to implement technology in ways that are fully understood and could be implemented? Anybody change their mind? Oh, okay. All right, looks like you guys did your job. Anyway, let's give our panelists a good hand. Oh.
Thank you. One thing I let you know, that we have, in the afternoon, we have the session of the digital twin. So if you're interested, please join. It's our 4th floor.
Okay, thanks a lot, guys. Great to have you.